Mesdames, Messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, doamnelor și domnilor, je suis très content d'être ici. I'm very happy to be here. I want to thank my friend Irina Petrescu personally. She's an old accomplice of mine. I think we did a good job on Saison Croisée France-Roumanie en 2018, I think. So we know each other for quite a while, and I'm very honored and very pleased that she invited me here. I thank also the Romanian Cultural Institute for extending their gracious support for that. I'm very happy to be here surrounded by friends and colleagues from Romania, and I'm very honored to be next to you because, frankly speaking, I don't know what I'm doing here. And I'm not saying that because I have to have an intro, but because I thought very seriously yesterday, why am I here? And I think I'm here for two reasons, mainly. One of them is the fact that I was inhabiting Bucharest in its most endangered area and in its most endangered decade, the 1980s, in the proximity of the Palace of Ceaușescu construction site. And probably that made me take architecture as the main subject of my artistic and cultural practice. It is true that I'm a director of a museum of contemporary art in Bucharest. Even more so, that museum is hosted in the Palace of Ceaușescu, and I think that this is a very interesting spiral of destiny as far as I'm concerned. And I'm pretty sure that my artistic practice dealing with architecture has its roots, as I said, in the hardship I went through in the 80s living in that area. I'm more of a hands-on person, but I have to thank my partner in many ways, Professor Architect Celia Ghica, for the fact that she forced me to spin a bit the way I'm working into theory, and we managed to do that together in the project I'm going to talk more about today, which is collective authorship. Thank you, Celia. So what I'm interested in is those who come after. I'm interested in architecture only as far as architecture is concerning people, is influencing people, and as far as people can fight back architecture. By saying that, I'm implying, and it's not wrong to think so, that I have an ambiguous opinion about architecture. And it's based on autobiographical and biographical things, so you're going to indulge me in that. Those people who come after, they are the people who contribute, and I let you fill in the blank. What are they contributed for? They adapt. Again, it's up to you to guess to what. And they remember. And I'll start with a personal memory. This is a graphic portrait of myself in the 80s. So that's really not my kind of thing. Okay. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm somewhere here. I'm somewhere here at the edge of the demolishing part. The dark gray is what's demolished. The light gray is what's next to be demolished. And the reason for... Il faut que tu parles dans le micro. Oui, je parle dans le micro. I'm already upsetting people. So I was living here, and the fact that I live there is, a loop, a gray zone, another kind of gray zone. It's a gray zone of communist law in Romania. The communist law in the 80s said you cannot have two private properties, real estate. But another law said you cannot sell or buy in the to be demolished area. Now there was this old, very sweet woman, a former actress, whose relatives from Israel bought for her a beautiful apartment in the very center of the city, on Calea Victoriei, and then she had to do something with the other property in that area, and that is how she got sort of an absolution to sell it. And that is how I could buy it, because it was sold for nothing. For obvious reasons, because it was a half-legal thing. On the other hand, you were supposed to be demolished in a couple of years. And then I bought it for something which was the rental amount for, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And that was the estimate of our survival there. Anyway, I was crossing this area every day, back and forth. There was no public transportation. And I was going in this area of Bucharest to work in the National Museum of Art. So my experience, I mean, besides being a dweller next to a big construction site, my experience with the construction site of Casa Oporului started in 1980, very early, and I witnessed day in, day out the processes and the chaos of it and the funny development of something which had no obvious reason or logic in its developments. And at the same time, it was looking dramatic. At the same time, I was witnessing this type of little signs. This is a reconstruction, mind you, made later on. And those are signs which were saying in Romania, this and this name, usually names from outside Bucharest, from northern regions of Romania, where you have a lot of construction workers coming from. God rest his soul in peace. And those are people who are dying accidentally during the night, mostly, in this immense plateau where you had big trucks, you know, flashing back and forth, and you had the cranes running around, and you had a process going on 24 hours a day. And the implications of it were somehow tragic. And of course, this was a habit of the local, of the people who were together coming from a certain village, and they were trying to appease the soul of the person who died violently. And in the afternoon, when I was coming back, those signs were already removed by the people who were surveilling the whole operation. Now, in 1990, I started with a couple of friends of mine, an artistic group, Sabril, which has been considered in recent art history probably the first alternative conceptual art group in an artist per se in Romania. And the very first thing we did was this installation, trying to reconstruct the situation I personally lived many times during the 80s in my parkour through the construction site of Casa Oporului. Why am I saying that? Because I suddenly realized that the whole trajectory, which was taking about 15 years, of a group of 3 people working in conceptual art, started from Ceaușescu's palace and from a very particular situation in the 80s. And I find it extremely significant. From here on, I think the translators are going to be happier because I'm going to read. And that's something I don't usually do, so I hope it's going to work out fine. So, collective authorship started in 2008 as a research into the possibilities to reconstruct with documentary tools the narratives around the inception, development, and finalizing of the complex project of the house. I'm going to call it the house from now on because it's shorter. Sometimes colloquially named the Palace of Ceaușescu. It was already clear at the onset of the research that the post-traumatic literature accumulating since the 1990s around that, I don't have my glasses, it's going to be difficult. Around what has been probably the most devastating set of events experienced by the city of Bucharest in modern times, was somehow obstructing the coming of life of a... I have to ask you to read that, I can't read it. I'm sorry. I'm going to do the mouse click. So
it's going to be a duo now. Yeah.
Sorry.
Hello, I'm Celia Ghica. So we work together on this project, and I'm the reader, the lecturer now. Yeah. So, where were you? Yeah. So it's about this truth that we were trying to discover that is both broader and more nuanced. So the preliminary interviews that were conducted with a group of architects that Călin did, who were holding during the 1980s key positions in the development of the project, proved to be unsatisfactory, since they were mostly focusing on the problems, inattentions, power struggles, and accomplishments of one single profession, architecture. And collective authorship started as a spontaneous situationist exploration of the city, with the taxi drivers driving him, passing the house, reminiscing voluntarily about their youth as participants with various attributions in the construction effort. And so an image was slowly building up from those random encounters, that of a possibility to realize a physical and conceptual equivalent of the house through a massive building of recorded statements, bringing forth the voices of anonymous participants to this huge endeavor. The novelty of such an approach was double. On one hand, it could open the floor to social and professional categories ignored by current literature, written exclusively from the vantage point of the architects and city planners. And on the other hand, it offered the opportunity of introducing different voices in the oral history cloud that was already feeding the analysis of the house. Understandably, after the political turn of 1989, the attention of both local and international communities was focusing mainly on the tragic implications and consequences of the projects by which Nicolae Ceaușescu aimed at the redesigning of the urban structure of Bucharest, of the other main cities from Romania, but also of the rural natural areas of the country. So this was a whole project for the country of redesigning the country. That attention stimulated a stream of testimonies from the victims of the expropriations, demolitions, and displacements that came in the package of redesigning Romania as a whole. Our project aims to expand this testimonial pool to the people who were involved in this complex process of transformation, enlarging by that the scope of the analysis and looking in a more nuanced way at a phenomenon of scale. The idea is to reach through interviews a relevant sample of the population participating in the design and the execution of the edifice, relevance achieved through profession, age group, and place in the administrative hierarchy. While the situationist approach has revealed useful in order to identify the elusiveness and complexity of this object house in terms of authorship, memory, impact on the city scale and on the city's identity, at the beginning of this investigation, another set of theoretical tools were required in order to put in perspective all the information that was gathered. As the topics delivered by the interviews were yet to be revealed, there was still no roadmap, and there was no a priori set of concepts meant to be illustrated and checked through the research. The only evidence about the aim of the whole process was implied in the title: the denial of individual authorship in the case of large urban equipments was implying from the onset a collective responsibility for the results of such endeavors. The ramifications of this work hypothesis are vast, but the one coming immediately at the front is the ethical dimension of such a statement. As far as responsibility is taken away from the top of the social pyramid of power and redistributed along top-down and bottom-up vectors of hierarchy, a series of questions are arising. Who is responsible? How is responsibility enacted? Why did the event arising the issues of responsibility and enactment occur? This inquisitive triad is looking at the distribution of power, who and how, at the causality of the social practice, how and why, and at the mechanisms of identity, who and why, again. In this strategy of approach proves useful to refer to Michel Foucault's concept of governmentality in this discussion along the three axes of knowledge, power, and ethics, with an emphasis on the last as the indicator of the processes by which the individual acts upon himself. Through ethics, the subject achieves a self-constitutive mode, responding in a personal manner to the agencies of moral codes and of the individual historical examples. That does not only imply a displacement of the moral system beyond morality into an amoral code, but creates a zone of relativity and creativity where ethics play a central role while being submitted to very subtle transformations. Without such an attitude, towards the who, how, why triad, it would be impossible to conduct a research into the process of the construction of the house. Since the idea of participation is tainted from the start by the implication of guilt. Governmentality offers a spectacular turnaround from the usual approach to the excesses of the communist dictatorship, if the researcher is willing to question the accepted methods and to agree with Foucault that the modern state is not only a centralized structure, but also a tricky combination in the same political structures of individualization techniques and of totalization procedures. In his lecture at the Collège de France from 1982, Foucault suggested that techniques of ruling are tied to the technologies of the self. And the couple, technique-technology, despite the metaphorical vagueness in Foucault's vocabulary, retains an appealing precision when applied to the processes of architecture and urban intervention. While Foucault did not elaborate on the mechanisms and specifics of the communist states, he mentions very briefly that the only rules that apply everywhere are the rules of liberalism. Now, almost 3 decades after the end of the First World War, we may better grasp the advantages of such an approach. Microeffects and self-governance. So the interviews that we had conducted so far within this project have led to a double conclusion. First, there is no black and white perception of the house among the participants. And second, there was no monolithic administrative structure that controlled the production and mainly its consequences. This brings an unexpected similarity with the mechanism of liberal societies, which are rejecting the unique interpretation of phenomena and their causalities. It comes as a surprise in the context of Ceaușescu's dictatorship, and especially of its last decade, dominated by extreme manifestations of anti-liberal governance, how the technologies of power proved to work with discontinuity, allowing the spontaneous accumulation of individual territories of reflection and action. As a beginning remark, it should be noted that all the interviewed participants were at the beginning of their professional life in the period of 1980s. From there, we can infer that the level of conformism, be it political, entrepreneurial, or otherwise, was rather low at the time of the events, and that the social participation of the subjects, their strategies of insertion, and the ambition to succeed were factors playing a role in the ways of designing their momentous tactics. Also, one should be aware of the subjective filter installed by memory. The reference to the advantages of young age, energy, carelessness, courage is recurrent in almost all the interviews. And that gives a general upbeat tone in contradiction with the grim details surfacing under the mainstream narratives. As mentioned previously, a major weakness in the applicability of Foucault's concept of governmentality might come from the fact that he never extended his reading on the subject in the area of communist systems, which at the time of his lectures at Collège de France were an important part of the global set of powers. A comparison could be, though, interesting, considering precisely the fertile ambiguity of Foucault's proposition, the fact that at least at the level of the official discourse, there is an overlapping of systems that should be submitted to scrutiny. The production of symbols in the state dominated by Căușescu could be assimilated to an ambition of affiliations with the medieval pastoral good government. The leader was not only an administrative, but also a symbolic synthesis of the paternalist models illustrated by rulers from Romanian Middle Ages. And here we can maybe discuss in comparison with the myth of nation discussed previously, with the revolutionary models of the early 20th century. Ceaușescu was Secretary General of Communist Party, simultaneously President of the Republic and President of the National Assembly, and the last position adorning him with a bizarre attribute of the scepter, a reference to royalty. The state engineered by Ceaușescu and his acolytes was not based on an evolutionary transformation from the period of pastoral techniques of government, but rather an original synthesis of the two, realized under the pressure of international capitalism and trying to adapt to the rhetoric of proletariat's dictatorship form of governmentality. If we look at Romania as it comes out of the interviews, what strikes first is the fact that with the starting of the house, the whole country was suddenly engaged on a path for which it was not necessarily prepared, technologically and in terms of human resources. The old structures meant to serve the party leaders in terms of catering to the representational architecture needs were insufficient in the newly installed raison d'etat. The house was only the main and most ambitious project of a whole series that needed the expertise of architects, engineers, and various types of workers. Suddenly, the human resource had to be redirected and redesigned. All the architects interviewed agreed the fact that despite the insane ambitions and the anachronism of the program, the house has been a stimulus for work migration from outside Bucharest to the capital city. In a country where most of the resources were centralized, while simultaneously the communist rule instituted a compulsory dispersion in the territory of all the fresh graduates from university, this has been a golden opportunity for an important lot of young architects to be where the action was. The same comes for other professionals involved in the process, visual artists, masons, etc., etc.
Okay.
Il faut couper là. Il faut couper là. Până unde?
No, it's not. Okay. So you got an idea about where it goes.
Non, il faut conclure.
Pardon?
Il faut conclure. Oui, il le fait.
So we're going to the conclusions right now. Okay. So here it is. The fact that according to the theory I started with, there is an innovation in the profession. A lot of young people are taking over, starting with the chief architect of the project. There are problems which are confronting the whole project in terms of administration, lack of administrative and financial checks and balances, and delays in technological development that have to be dealt with. And everything is dealt with at the micro level, mostly at the level of the people who are working on the front line. And my theory is that everything is in the end happening at those levels of local initiatives, of groups which are migrating within each other, which are trying to find solutions for the whole project, but also for their own benefit. Here you got a survey display of several of the around 90 people we went to interview. And the whole thing would have been, the conclusion would have been that the Casa Poporului is a product and the manifestation of governmentality in a Balkan communist style. And yeah, well, that's my favorite metaphor. This is the Museum of Contemporary Art, and this is what I think we are doing currently in this building, which is keeping us, coming together and discussing about things. I have a 1 minute teaser of the film. Can I show it?
With pleasure.
Yeah?
Yes.
Good.
Vreau să vin la București, ca toți, să-i spunem, arhitecții din perioada aia, dar nu vreau să vin la Casa Republicii, evident.
Cei mai mulți ar fi vrut să nu fie apți să lucreze. Și trebuie să vă mărturisesc că eram foarte îngăduitoare cu dorința asta a lor.
Cioplitori piatră, sculptori piatră, marmură.
De exemplu, arcadele de la corpul ăsta D1, o să râzi, le-am executat pe un strung carusel.
Trecuse ceașcă care nu le avea, nu știi, și aici trageți o ușă. 400 de tuburi de oxigen au consumat numai ca să taie armătura.
A spus, da, nu se poate, însă n-a fost lăsat să termine cu o replică memorabilă și să se facă o variantă din care să se vadă că nu se poate.
Deci Casa Poporului, eu aș vedea-o precum piramidele care au răsărit la un moment dat din dorința de nemurire a faraonului în mijlocul deșertului, cu deosebirea că deșertul sau în jurul Casei Poporului a fost creat.
Nu aveam nicio taină.
Nu eram mândri.
Chiar ne bucuram. Cât mai mare, parcă tâmpisem și noi la vreme. Cât mai mare să fie, să avem de lucru.
Era ceea ce în jargonul de azi se cheamă o provocare. Așa. Evident că eram tineri și ne hăhăiam și...
Cu ce?
Că dacă ar ști cei de la Marmura că noi câștigam o jumătate de dacie...
Da, până la urmă salariile le lăsam la minion.
Și complexe, și grea, și frumoasă. Sunt toate la un loc. N-aș putea să spun că a fost...
Eu spun că nu este terminată. Ultima mână se vede când se face ultima operație.
Dacă n-ar costa atât de mult, aș demola-o.
Mai degrabă chici.
So, they saved the day. Thank you.